Imagine walking through a busy airport or a crowded bar, or even just down your own street. You pass under a security camera, a grainy lens recording your every step. You look normal, you look fine. But then, you turn a corner, you step into a shadow, you walk just 1 inch out of the camera's view, and that's it. You are never seen again. No more cameras ever catch your face, no phone pings, no footprints. Today, we're looking at 10 disappearance cases with disturbing last-seen CCTV footage just moments before they vanished. If you love deep dives into the unexplained, please hit that subscribe button and give hype points from below. It really helps the channel. Now, let's get into it. Let me show you something. This is a man running for his life. Or at least, he believes he is. He's in an airport, one of the safest, most surveilled places on the planet, surrounded by security guards, police, and hundreds of witnesses. And he runs away from all of it. He runs toward a barbed wire fence at the edge of the tarmac, scales it like it's nothing, drops into a meadow, and sprints into a forest. That was July 8th, 2014. His name is Lars Mittank, and nobody has seen him since. This clip has been viewed millions of times, making Lars arguably the most famous missing person on the internet. And the reason people keep watching, keep rewinding, keep pausing frame by frame is because the more you watch it, the less sense it makes. So let's rewind. Let's go back to where this actually started. Not at the airport. Not even at the hotel. It started at a bar on a beach during what was supposed to be the best week of his life. Varna, Bulgaria. July 2014. If you've never been, picture a budget Ibiza on the Black Sea coast. The Golden Sands Resort is exactly what it sounds like. Long stretches of beach, cheap drinks, thumping bass from open-air clubs, and thousands of young Europeans there for one thing, to have a good time. It's hot, it's loud, it smells like sunscreen and beer. Lars Mittank, 28 years old, from the small German town of Itzehoe, is there with a group of his mates on a classic lads' holiday. Football, partying, the whole deal. And Lars, by every account, he was the last guy you'd expect this to happen to. A precision mechanic at a power plant, stable job, stable life, an only child. Like incredibly close with his parents, after his father had a stroke in 2012, Lars would drive hours to help his mom around the house. He was into fitness, the outdoors, a fan of Bear Grylls and wilderness survival. He knew how to hunt, fish, and trap. This was not a fragile person. No history of mental illness, no drugs, no prior episodes of anything even remotely unusual. Remember that. It matters later. The trouble started on July 2nd, the last night of the group holiday. Lars and his friends ended up in a bar argument with a group of fans from a rival football club. Some reports say they were Bayern Munich supporters. It got physical. Lars took a hit to the side of his head, not a huge brawl, just a messy, drunken scuffle. But it was enough. The blow ruptured his eardrum. Now, this is where the story splits. His friends flew home on July 3rd as planned, but Lars couldn't. A ruptured eardrum means you can't fly. The pressure change at altitude could cause permanent damage or excruciating pain. A doctor told him to wait a few days, prescribed him an antibiotic called cefprozil, 500 milligrams, and sent him on his way. So Lars moved from the nice 4-star Hotel Viva, where the group had been staying, to a cheaper place near the airport, the Color Varna Hotel. And this is where everything changes. Picture the shift. One day you're surrounded by your mates drinking on a beach, music everywhere. The next, you're alone in a budget hotel in a city where you don't speak the language. Your ear is throbbing, your jaw is swollen, and you're on medication you've never taken before. The Color Varna isn't the Golden Sands. It's industrial. It's quiet. It's a different world. And Lars starts to unravel. Over the next few days, he makes a series of increasingly frantic phone calls to his mother. He tells her things that don't track with reality. He says people are following him. He tells her not to use his credit cards. According to Sandra Mittank, in one of those calls, he whispered 4 words that still haunt her. "I'm not safe here." Now, the hotel's CCTV tells its own story. At 1 a.m. on his last night there, cameras capture Lars pacing the hallways, looking out windows, scanning for something. He gets in the elevator, then immediately jumps out, pressing himself into the corner as if hiding. Then he leaves the hotel entirely and disappears for about an hour. Where did he go? Nobody knows. He comes back, and by morning, he's headed for the airport. But here's the thing. On the outside, when he walks into Varna Airport on the morning of July 8th, he almost looks normal. Yellow t-shirt, denim shorts, luggage in hand. He's there to see the airport doctor, a man named Dr. Kostov, to get cleared to fly home. He's trying to leave. He wants out. Dr. Kostov would later describe Lars as trembling and erratic, but he was cooperating. He sat in the chair. He was answering questions. Whatever was happening inside his head, he was holding it together, barely. And then a construction worker walks into the office. That's it. That's the trigger. A random guy in a hard hat opens the door. The airport was undergoing renovations at the time, so workers were everywhere. And Lars snaps. According to the doctor, Lars screamed something like, "I don't want to die here," leapt out of his chair, and bolted out of the room. He left everything behind: his bag, his wallet, his passport, his phone, every single thing a person needs to exist in the modern world, abandoned on a chair in a doctor's office in a Bulgarian airport. And then, nothing. No more footage, no more sightings, no body, no bones, no clothing found snagged on a branch. For over a decade, Lars Mittank has been gone. All right, let's slow down. Let's stop watching the footage on loop and actually think about what we're seeing here. Because the more you pick this apart, the stranger it gets. Let's start with what I call the safety paradox. Lars Mittank was terrified. That much is obvious. He believed someone was trying to kill him. He told his mother. He told the doctor. His behavior at the hotel screamed it. So what does a terrified person do? They go somewhere safe. And where was Lars? Inside an international airport terminal, crawling with armed security, cameras on every wall, police at the gates, hundreds of witnesses. If someone were genuinely trying to hurt you, an airport is one of the safest places you could be. But Lars didn't run toward security. He didn't grab a guard and say, "Help me, someone's following me." He ran away from all of it. He ran out the doors, across the open parking lot, and over a barbed wire fence into the Bulgarian countryside. Alone, on foot, with no phone, no money, no identification, and no plan. Why would you do that? Under what logic does a dense, unmapped forest feel safer than a room full of armed officers? The answer, and it's a hard one, is that the threat wasn't out there. The threat was inside his own head. And when the enemy is your own mind, there's no security checkpoint that can help you. Now let's talk about the belongings. This detail doesn't get enough attention. Lars left behind his phone, his passport, and his wallet. In 2014, your phone is your lifeline. It's how you call for help, how you navigate, your connection to the world. Your passport is your identity. Your wallet is how you survive. Lars left all three on a chair. Remember, this is a man with survivalist training. He understood what you need to stay alive in the wild. And the first rule of survival is, you grab your gear. Lars didn't take anything. A man running for his life takes his phone to call for help. A man running from his life leaves everything behind because none of it matters anymore. Those are two very different scenarios. So what actually happened to him? Let's look at the theories. The leading medical theory is that Lars experienced a medication-induced psychotic break. The antibiotic cefprozil is a cephalosporin, generally safe, taken by millions without issue. But in rare cases, the medical literature documents links to acute paranoia, hallucinations, and excited delirium. Stack that on top of a ruptured eardrum causing vertigo and constant ringing, the isolation of being stranded where you can't communicate, and possible undiagnosed head trauma from the fight. That cocktail of factors could absolutely shatter a person's grip on reality. But here's the counterpoint. If Lars was hallucinating, then where is he? The forest near Varna Airport isn't the Amazon. Authorities searched it. They brought scent dogs. The dogs tracked his trail from the airport to the fence, across the meadow, and then the trail stopped. Cold. In the middle of an open field. That's usually a sign of one of two things. Either the person entered a body of water or they got into a vehicle. There was no significant body of water nearby. And if he got into a vehicle, then he wasn't alone, and the paranoia wasn't entirely unfounded. Then there's the theory that Lars was targeted. Some point to the missing hour, that gap in hotel CCTV where he left at 1 a.m. and returned an hour later. What did he see? What did he walk into? Varna's underworld isn't a secret. Organized crime, trafficking. Could Lars have stumbled onto something he shouldn't have? It's a compelling idea. But the airport cameras recorded everything, every angle. And in all that footage, not a single person is seen pursuing Lars. Nobody follows him out the door. Nobody scales the fence after him. The men he was so afraid of are invisible on camera. They exist only in his frantic phone calls and his wild eyes. And the final theory, voluntary disappearance. That Lars used his apparent breakdown as cover to start over in Eastern Europe. But this falls apart immediately. He had no money, no documents, and a close family he spoke to daily. People who plan to disappear take cash and identification. Lars took nothing. Here's what we're left with. Somewhere in that CCTV footage, in those final seconds where Lars Middenk is sprinting across a parking lot in a yellow t-shirt, his legs pumping, his arms swinging, the barbed wire catching the sunlight as he pulls himself over it, somewhere in that footage is the answer to what happened to him. But the camera can only show us the what. It can show us a man running. It can't tell us why. Bulgarian police closed their active investigation years ago. German authorities have no leads. His mother, Sandra, still maintains a Facebook page, posting his photo on birthdays, asking anyone with information to come forward. Hundreds of thousands of followers. And yet, in over a decade, not a single credible sighting has ever been confirmed. No clothing in the woods, no remains found by hikers, no unidentified body in any European database. He didn't walk into that forest and die, or if he did, the forest has never given him back. He ran out of the frame, and he ran out of the world. There's a hotel in downtown Los Angeles that doesn't just have a dark history. It is the dark history. The building itself feels like a crime scene, not because of what happened in one room on one night, but because of what has happened there over and over and over again across nearly a century, as if the place were designed to collect tragedy. The Cecil Hotel, built in 1927 during the golden age of LA glamour, 14 floors, over 600 rooms. When it opened, it was supposed to be luxurious, a place for traveling businessmen and upwardly mobile tourists. But the Great Depression hit 2 years later, and the Cecil never recovered. The neighborhood around it hollowed out. By the 1950s, the hotel sat on the edge of Skid Row, one of the most concentrated zones of poverty, homelessness, and open drug use in the entire United States. The lobby still had its marble and its chandeliers, but upstairs, the hallways were narrow, dimly lit, and reeked of something you couldn't quite name. The long-term residents were transients, addicts, and people the rest of the city had forgotten. And then there were the guests who checked in and never checked out. At least 16 people have died at the Cecil Hotel. Suicides mostly, people jumping from upper-floor windows with such regularity that it earned the nickname the Suicide. But it wasn't just self-inflicted tragedy. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, lived on the 14th floor during his 1985 killing spree. Jack Unterweger, an Austrian serial killer, stayed there while murdering sex workers in 1991. The Cecil didn't just attract darkness, it seemed to breed it. By 2013, someone had the idea to rebrand part of the hotel as Stay on Main, a budget hostel marketed to young international backpackers. Same building, same elevators, same hallways, just a new name on the website and cheaper rates. And that's how a 21-year-old Canadian student named Elisa Lam ended up there. Elisa was from Vancouver. She was bright, curious, and open about her struggles. She kept a Tumblr blog where she wrote about her life with bipolar disorder, her love of fashion, and her desire for adventure. In January 2013, she set out on what she called her West Coast Tour, a solo trip down the Pacific coast, hitting up San Diego, Los Angeles, and Santa Cruz. She was doing what thousands of young travelers do every year, seeing the world, documenting it online, calling her parents every single day. She checked into the Cecil Hotel on January 26th, and within days, something shifted. Her roommates in the shared dormitory complained about her behavior. Odd enough that hotel staff moved her to a private room. What exactly she did, nobody has publicly detailed, but the move is significant. She went from being surrounded by people to being completely alone in a building that has spent the better part of a century making people disappear. January 31st, 2013. Elisa Lam misses her scheduled checkout date. Her parents in Vancouver, who had spoken with her daily, suddenly can't reach her. They call the LAPD. A missing persons investigation begins. Now, the police search the Cecil Hotel. They go through hallways, they check rooms, they bring dogs, they go to the roof, they find nothing. Let that sink in for a moment. They searched the building, including the roof, and came up empty. With no leads, the LAPD makes a decision that will turn this case into a global phenomenon. On February 13th, they release a clip of surveillance footage from the hotel's elevator. It's about 4 minutes long, and it is one of the most unsettling pieces of video you will ever watch. Let me walk you through it. Elisa enters the elevator alone. She's wearing a red hoodie, and she immediately leans forward and presses a whole column of buttons. Not one floor, not two, but what looks like every button on the panel. Then she steps back and waits. The doors don't close. She waits a few more seconds. Still nothing. So she moves to the door, leans her head out into the hallway, and looks left. Then right. Then she jumps backward into the elevator, pressing herself flat against the far wall into the corner where the camera can barely see her. She's hiding. From what? The hallway, as far as we can tell from the footage, is completely empty. Then she steps out. And this is the part that people have replayed millions of times. She stands just outside the elevator and begins making these fluid, deliberate hand movements, arms extended, fingers splayed, wrists rolling. It doesn't look panicked. It doesn't look random. It looks almost like she's communicating with someone, or performing something, or responding to something only she can perceive. She steps back into the elevator, presses more buttons, steps out again, and then she's gone. She walks out of frame, and the elevator doors, which refused to close for the entire time she was standing there, finally begin to cycle. Open, close, open, close. As if the elevator had been waiting for her to leave before it could function again. That footage is the last confirmed visual record of Elisa Lam alive. For the next 19 days, nobody knows where she is. The internet, meanwhile, goes into overdrive. The video goes viral. Armchair detectives dissect every frame. Theories multiply by the hour. And still, no Elisa. Then, on February 19th, hotel guests start complaining. The water pressure is low, and the water coming out of the taps is dark. It tastes strange, metallic, sweet, wrong. Some guests later described it as black. A maintenance worker is sent to the roof to check the hotel's water supply. There are 4 large cistern tanks up there, cylindrical, metal, each about 8 feet tall and 4 feet wide. He climbs a ladder, opens the hatch on one of the tanks, and looks inside. Elisa Lam is floating in the water. She's naked. Her clothes are drifting beside her, coated in a fine sand-like grit. She had been in the hotel's drinking water supply for nearly 3 weeks. For 19 days, every guest at the Cecil Hotel had been drinking, showering in, and brushing their teeth with water that contained a decomposing body. The Los Angeles County coroner ruled Elisa Lam's death an accidental drowning, with bipolar disorder listed as a significant contributing factor. Case closed, file it away. Except it's not closed, not in any meaningful sense, because the official explanation requires you to accept a series of physical events that, when you line them up, border on impossible. Let's start with the roof. To get from the hotel's upper floors to the rooftop, Elisa had 2 options. Option 1, a door that was locked, alarmed, and accessible only to staff with a key and passcode. If she opened it, an alarm should have sounded throughout the building. It didn't. Option 2, an external fire escape, a steep, precarious metal ladder on the outside of the building, at night, alone. Possible? Sure. Likely for a young woman unfamiliar with the building, potentially in crisis? Harder sell. But let's say she made it to the roof. Fine. Now she has to get into the tank. These cisterns are roughly 8 feet tall. There's a ladder so she could have climbed up. But here's the thing. The hatch. The maintenance worker who found her body initially reported that the heavy metal lid was closed when he got there. Think about the physics of that for a second. Picture yourself climbing a ladder, lifting a heavy metal hatch, lowering yourself into a tank partially filled with water, and then, while treading water in the dark, reaching up above your head and pulling that lid shut behind you. You can't. It's not a matter of strength or willpower. The mechanics don't work. You can't close a heavy lid above your head from inside a tank of water. So either she didn't close it and someone else did, or the maintenance worker was wrong about the lid being shut. Both options create more questions than they answer. Then there are her clothes. They were floating in the water beside her, along with that sand-like particulate that was never fully identified. This means she undressed after entering the tank. Why? If she was in crisis, why would she strip? If she was trying to cool down during a manic episode, a theory some have proposed, why go through the elaborate process of reaching the roof and climbing into a sealed cistern when there were far easier options? Now let's go back to that elevator footage for a second. The big question everyone asks is, who was she talking to? The hand gestures, the peering into the hallway, the hiding in the corner. Mental health professionals have suggested this is consistent with psychomotor agitation, the kind of restless, repetitive movement that can accompany a severe manic episode, and that's entirely plausible. Bipolar disorder is serious. It can distort perception and behavior in profound ways. But here's what bugs people. The door. That elevator door stays open for the entire duration of her interaction with it. The moment she leaves, it starts working again. Some have pointed out that she may have pressed the door hold button, which would explain the delay. Fair enough. But watch the footage closely. Her hand movements near the panel don't clearly correspond to that button, and elevators on a hold cycle typically close after 30 seconds, not 4 minutes. Was the elevator malfunctioning? Was someone holding it from another floor? Was the system simply old and glitchy in a building that was already falling apart? All possible. None proven. And then there's the detail that tips the whole case from tragic into surreal. At the exact time Elisa Lam's body was decomposing in the Cecil Hotel's water supply, a tuberculosis outbreak was spreading through Skid Row, the neighborhood directly outside the hotel's front door. The test used to diagnose that outbreak? It's called the Lam-Elisa test. That's not a theory. It's not an interpretation. That's just what the test is called. It means nothing forensically. But it's the kind of coincidence that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Here's what we know for certain. Elisa Lam entered the Cecil Hotel on January 26, 2013. She was found in a rooftop water tank on February 19th. Between those two dates, she passed through an elevator, onto a roof, and into a cistern through a sequence of events that no investigation has fully reconstructed. The coroner says accident. The internet says murder. Her family says a system failed their daughter. And the Cecil Hotel, which has since been purchased and is being converted into affordable housing, says nothing at all. But there's one last thing. After Elisa's death, her Tumblr blog continued to update. New posts appeared for months, photos, quotes, fragments of thought. It wasn't supernatural. Tumblr has a queue feature that lets you schedule posts in advance. Elisa had loaded it up before her trip, and the platform kept publishing on autopilot long after she was gone. Her digital voice outlived her physical one. The last post she wrote before she left for California was about wanting to experience life fully, about not wanting to be afraid, about stepping into the unknown. She stepped into the Cecil Hotel looking for adventure, and she found a mystery that the world still hasn't been able to close. Here's a riddle for you. A man walks into a bar. The bar has one public entrance with a security camera pointed directly at it, recording 24 hours a day. The camera captures every person who walks in and every person who walks out. At 1:55 in the morning, the man is filmed re-entering the bar. At 2 a.m., the bar closes. Over the next hour, every patron, every bartender, every member of the band files out past the camera. Every single one is accounted for. Except him. He never comes out. That's not a riddle. That's the case of Brian Schaffer. And nearly 20 years later, nobody, not the Columbus Police Department, not the FBI, not the thousands of amateur investigators who have picked this thing apart online, can explain how a 6'2" medical student vanished from a second-story bar with one exit. Let me set the scene. Columbus, Ohio. March 31st, 2006. It's a Friday night, the first night of spring break at Ohio State University. The campus is electric. Students are flooding out of lecture halls and into bars, celebrating the end of a brutal winter quarter. The mood is loud, loose, and reckless in the way that only a college town on the first warm night of the year can be. The South Campus Gateway is the place to be. It's a brand new mixed-use development right on the edge of campus. Polished brick, clean glass, upscale restaurants and bars designed to give the area a facelift after years of blight. Think of it as the university's attempt to build a sanitized nightlife district. Everything is new. Everything is monitored. Security cameras cover the corridors, the storefronts, the parking areas. And sitting on the second floor of this complex, accessible only by an escalator from the ground level, is a bar called the Ugly Tuna Saloona. The Ugly Tuna is exactly what it sounds like. A loud, crowded college bar with a tiki shack aesthetic, cheap beer specials, and a live band on Friday nights. The sign out front reads, "Fresh Fish, Ugly Owners." On a spring break Friday, the place is packed wall to wall. You can barely hear the person next to you. It's the kind of bar where you lose your friends in the crowd and find them again at closing time. But here's the detail that matters. The Ugly Tuna sits on the second floor. To get in, you ride an escalator up from the ground level corridor. To get out, you ride the same escalator back down. That escalator corridor is the only public entrance and exit. And at the top of that escalator, pointed directly at the landing, is a security camera that never stops recording. Now let me tell you about Brian. Brian Schaffer was 27 years old, a second-year medical student at Ohio State, smart, well-liked, the kind of guy people gravitated toward. He was a Pearl Jam fan, had their stick figure Alive logo tattooed on his right arm. He was disciplined enough to get into one of the most competitive medical programs in the Midwest, but easygoing enough to be the guy organizing the bar crawl on a Friday night. But Brian was also carrying something heavy. Just 3 weeks before that Friday night, his mother, Renee, had died of a rare form of cancer. Brian was devastated. The two were close, and her death had knocked something loose in him that his friends could see, even when he was smiling. Beneath the celebration, beneath the drinks and the music, there was grief. Real, raw, unprocessed grief. Still, Brian was moving forward. He had a trip to Miami planned for that Monday with his girlfriend, Alexis Wagoner. He was going to propose. He had the ring. He had the tickets. He had every reason in the world to show up on Monday morning. The night of March 31st, Brian goes out with his friend Clint Florence. They bar hop around the campus area, a few drinks here, a few drinks there, and eventually end up at the Ugly Tuna sometime around midnight. A woman named Meredith Reed joins them. The security camera captures all three of them riding the escalator up to the second floor at approximately 1:15 a.m. Brian is in good spirits. He's been drinking, but he's upright, he's social, he's functional. For the next 40 minutes, they're inside the bar. The band is playing, the crowd is thick. So nothing unusual happens. Or if it does, nobody remembers it. At 1:55 a.m., the camera catches Brian again. He's standing on the landing just outside the bar's entrance at the top of the escalator. He's talking to two young women. The conversation looks casual. He appears to be saying goodbye, smiling, maybe flirting. The two women head toward the escalator to leave, and Brian turns around and walks back into the bar. That's it. That is the last confirmed image of Brian Schaffer alive. 5 minutes later, The bar closes. The lights come up. The bartenders start clearing glasses. The crowd files out. Clint Florence leaves. Meredith Reed leaves. The band breaks down their equipment and leaves. The staff closes up and leaves. Every single one of them passes the camera on the way out. The Columbus Police Department would later review that footage frame by frame, counting heads, matching faces. They accounted for every person who entered the Ugly Tuna that night. Every person except Brian Schaffer. His friends wait for him outside for a while, then assume he caught a cab or went home with someone. Nobody panics. It's spring break. People scatter. But Monday comes, and Brian doesn't show up for his flight to Miami. He doesn't answer his phone. He doesn't show up to class. Alexis calls his apartment. Nothing. His father, Randy, drives to Columbus. The door to Brian's apartment is locked. His car is parked outside. His keys, his wallet, his ID, all inside. Brian Schaffer is gone. All right, this is where your brain starts to hurt. Because the question isn't what happened to Brian Schaffer. The question is, how did he leave that building? Let's lay out the geometry. The Ugly Tuna Saloon is on the second floor. The main entrance, the escalator, is covered by a camera. Brian is seen going in at 1:55 a.m. He is never seen coming out. The police reviewed every frame of footage from that camera between 1:55 a.m. and the moment the last staff member locked the doors. Brian does not appear. So the obvious question, was there another way out? Yes, technically. There was a service door at the back of the bar that led into an active construction zone. The South Campus Gateway was still being built out in 2006, and behind the polished facade of the bars and restaurants was a maze of scaffolding, plywood barriers, exposed concrete, and construction debris. In theory, as Brian could have slipped through that service door and navigated the construction site to reach street level. But here's the thing. That construction zone was not a clean hallway. It was a disaster area. Mud, rubble, unstable flooring, pitch dark at 2 a.m. Brian had been drinking heavily in street clothes. If he walked through there, he would have left footprints and traces. And when he emerged onto the street, he would have been picked up by the external cameras on the Gateway complex, or the nearby Gateway Cinema, or the adjacent bars. The police checked every feed. Nothing. Not a single frame of Brian Schaffer on any camera outside the building. The Columbus PD went underground, sending officers into the sewer system beneath the gateway. They brought cadaver dogs through the construction site. They searched dumpsters and the rooftop. They tore that building apart. Nothing, no body, no clothing, no blood, no sign that Brian Schaffer had ever existed past 1:55 a.m. on April 1st, 2006. And then there's the detail with the scent dogs. When K9 units were brought to the Ugly Tuna, the dogs tracked Brian's scent from inside the bar to the threshold of the main entrance, the exact spot where the camera last recorded him. And then the trail stopped. Dead. As if Brian had simply evaporated at the door. Now, stay with me here, because there's one more thing that keeps this case from ever fully settling. Months after Brian disappeared, his girlfriend Alexis called his cell phone. Since the night he vanished, it had always gone straight to voicemail, dead battery, dead phone, or destroyed. But this time, it didn't go to voicemail. It rang. There 3 times. Then it cut out. The call pinged a cell tower in Hilliard, Ohio, a suburb about 15 miles west of Columbus. Think about what that means. Months later, Brian's phone was powered on somewhere. Somebody had it. Was it Brian? Was it someone who found the phone? Was it a tower glitch, a ghost signal bouncing off infrastructure? Investigators have never been able to confirm what happened, and the phone was never recovered. A dead man's phone doesn't ring. A destroyed phone doesn't ping a tower. So either Brian Schaffer was alive months after he vanished, or someone who had his phone was. The aftermath of Brian Schaffer's disappearance is almost as painful as the disappearance itself. His father, Randy Schaffer, spent the next 2 years searching for his son. He put up flyers, he hired private investigators. But he went on television, he walked the streets of Columbus handing out photos. And then, in 2008, Randy died in a freak accident, a fall at his home. He never got answers. He buried his wife to cancer, lost his son to a void, and then the void took him too. And then there's Clint Florence, Brian's friend, the last known person to be with him that night. In the years after, Clint was asked to take a polygraph test. He refused. He stopped cooperating with investigators and stopped talking to Brian's family entirely. Does that mean he knows something? Not necessarily. Polygraphs are unreliable, and being the last person seen with a missing man is a weight that could crush anyone. But his silence has become part of the mythology, another door that won't open. The theories range from tragic to conspiratorial. But some believe Brian was killed, that he encountered someone in the construction zone, or that foul play occurred inside the bar, and his body was concealed in the renovations, buried beneath concrete poured the following week. Others believe he walked away, that his mother's death, the pressure of medical school, and the weight of a looming proposal pushed him to vanish deliberately. But voluntary disappearance requires resources. It requires planning. Brian left his wallet in his apartment. He left his car. He left the engagement ring he was going to give Alexis. A man who plans to disappear doesn't leave his entire identity sitting on a kitchen counter. Here's what stays with me. There's a camera. The camera works. The camera recorded every person who walked into that bar and every person who walked out. It's not broken. It's not angled wrong. It captured everything it was supposed to capture. And according to that camera, Brian Schaffer walked into the Ugly Tuna Saloona on the first night of spring break in 2006. And as far as any lens in the world is concerned, he's still in there. London has over 500,000 surveillance cameras. 500,000. It is, by most estimates, the most watched city on the planet. If you walk through central London for an hour, your face is captured roughly 300 times. Bus cameras, tube cameras, shop fronts, traffic lights, a TM's private security, government systems. The coverage is so dense that the average Londoner is recorded dozens of times before they finish their morning commute. On September 14, 2007, a 14-year-old boy walked out of King's Cross Station into this web of lenses. He was 5'3". He was wearing a black Slipknot t-shirt, black jeans, and glasses. He had a small bag over his shoulder and a PSP gaming console in his pocket. He looked like any other teenager heading into the city for the day. And then the most surveilled city on Earth lost him, completely. His name is Andrew Gosden, and his case is one of the most quietly devastating disappearances in British history, not because of what we know, but because of how little we have ever been able to find out. Let me take you back to where Andrew came from, because the contrast matters. Doncaster, South Yorkshire, a working-class town in the north of England, not glamorous, not dangerous, just ordinary. The kind of place where people know their neighbors and teenagers walk to school along the same route every day. Andrew lived with his parents and his older sister in a comfortable family home. His father, Kevin, was a statistician. His mother worked part-time. They were a close, stable family with no history of conflict or dysfunction. And Andrew was, by any measure, exceptional. He was enrolled in the UK government's Young, Gifted and Talented program, a scheme for the top 5% of students nationally. He was a prize-winning mathematician. He had a 100% attendance record at Macaulay Catholic High School. His teachers expected him to end up at somewhere like Cambridge. He was quiet, a bit introverted, deeply into metal and alternative music. Slipknot, Muse, that mid-2000s scene of black t-shirts and heavy riffs. But he wasn't troubled. He wasn't bullied, at least not in any way that anyone has ever identified. He was just a bright, slightly shy kid who happened to be really, really good at numbers. He also had almost no digital footprint. In 2007, most 14-year-olds were already on Bebo or MySpace, texting constantly, building their first online identities. Andrew had none of it. No mobile phone, no email address that anyone knew about, no social media accounts, no online gaming profiles. In an era when teenagers were becoming permanently connected, Andrew Gosden was practically invisible online. Remember that. It becomes the most important detail in the entire case. Friday, September 14th, 2007. The morning starts like any other in the Gosden household. Andrew puts on his school uniform. His parents leave for work. His sister heads out. Andrew walks out the front door as if he's going to school. But he doesn't go to school. Instead, he waits. Once the house is empty, he goes back inside. He changes out of his uniform into his own clothes, the black Slipknot t-shirt, black jeans. He packs a small bag. He takes his PSP and he takes his wallet, which contains about 200 pounds in savings, money he'd withdrawn from a cash machine. He leaves behind roughly 100 pounds in his account and another 100 in cash at home. He leaves his PSP charger. He leaves most of his clothes. Then he walks to Doncaster railway station. Now, wait until you hear what he did at the ticket counter. Andrew asks for a one-way ticket to London King's Cross. The fare is £31.40. The ticket seller, and this detail has been confirmed, tells him that a return ticket would cost only 50 pence more. 50 pence, that's less than $1, essentially free. Andrew says no, just the single. Think about what that means for a second. A 14-year-old, presumably planning a day trip, is offered a return ticket for pocket change and turns it down. His father, Kevin, has said publicly that Andrew had relatives in London, an aunt and uncle, and might have planned to stay with them or get a lift back. Maybe he just didn't think he'd need the return because he wasn't planning to take the train home. That's one reading. But there's another reading, and it's the one that keeps investigators up at night. A one-way ticket means you're not planning to come back. Andrew boards the 9:35 a.m. train to King's Cross. He travels during school hours, which means the carriage is mostly adults, commuters, not classmates. Nobody who would recognize him or wonder why a teenager in a Slipknot shirt isn't in a classroom. Witnesses on the train say he seemed relaxed, playing his PSP, looking out the window. Just a kid on a journey. At 11:20 a.m., the train arrives at King's Cross. Andrew walks through the station, past the ticket barriers, through the main concourse with its vaulted ceiling and rushing crowds. At 11:25 a.m., the station's external CCTV captures him walking out of the main entrance. 7 seconds of footage. He's small in the frame, a slight figure against the massive facade of King's Cross. He turns left and walks south toward the Euston Road. And that's it. That is the last confirmed image of Andrew Gosden. He steps out of the station and into central London, into 500,000 cameras and 10 million people, and he is never recorded again. All right, let's break this apart, because there are two dominant theories about what happened to Andrew Gosden, and both of them have holes you could drive a train through. First theory is Andrew was lured to London by a predator. This is the theory that most people land on, and for good reason. A 14-year-old traveling alone to a major city, making deliberate choices to avoid detection, skipping school, changing clothes, timing his departure for when the house was empty, suggests he was going to meet someone he didn't want his parents to know about. The one-way ticket, the cash withdrawal, the lack of survival supplies, it all points to a kid who believed he was going somewhere safe, to meet someone he trusted, and that he'd be taken care of when he got there. But here's the problem. If Andrew was groomed by a predator, how did they contact him? He had no phone, no email, no social media, no gaming accounts. The police went through his school computers. They checked library terminals. They investigated every possible avenue of digital communication available in 2007 and found nothing. Zero contact with anyone suspicious, no secret accounts, no hidden messages. So either the grooming happened entirely offline, face-to-face, through a method that left no trace, or Andrew had an avenue of communication that nobody in his life, including his parents, ever knew about. Both are possible. Neither has been proven. Another theory is Andrew ran away. Maybe he was unhappy. Maybe something was happening at school or at home that nobody picked up on. Maybe he just wanted a day of freedom, a spontaneous adventure in London, visiting a music shop or catching a gig, and things went wrong from there. His father has pointed out that there were bands playing in London that weekend that Andrew might have wanted to see. A secret concert trip by a teenager with no phone and a taste for metal music. It's not that far-fetched. But this theory has its own problems. If Andrew was planning a fun day out, why the one-way ticket? Why leave his PSP charger behind, the one item that would keep him entertained on the journey home? Why withdraw almost all of his savings instead of just enough for a day's expenses? And if he was running away permanently, Why leave 100 pounds in cash sitting at home and most of his favorite clothes in his wardrobe? He didn't pack like someone starting a new life. He didn't pack like someone planning a day trip either. He packed like someone who wasn't thinking about coming back but hadn't fully committed to staying gone. And then there's the surveillance failure, the detail that turns this case from difficult to nearly impossible. South Yorkshire police didn't formally identify Andrew on the King's Cross footage for 27 days, nearly a month. By the time they contacted Transport for London and the Metropolitan Police to request CCTV from the surrounding streets, bus routes, and tube stations, the footage had been overwritten. In 2007, most London CCTV systems operated on a 14 to 21-day recording cycle. The tapes recycled automatically. By day 27, Andrew's movements after leaving King's Cross, every bus he might have boarded, every street he walked down, every shop he entered, were gone. Erased. Recorded over with footage of strangers who had nothing to do with anything. The most surveilled city on Earth had the answers, and by the time anyone thought to look, the city had already forgotten. In December 2021, 14 years after Andrew disappeared, 2 men in London, aged 38 and 45, were arrested on suspicion of kidnapping and human trafficking in connection with his case. Devices were seized. Analysis took nearly 2 years. And then, in September 2023, both men were cleared and eliminated from the inquiry. Back to square one, again. Andrew's father, Kevin Gosden, has become one of the most visible and articulate advocates for missing children in the UK. He's spoken publicly, repeatedly, about the agony of not knowing, about how the absence of an answer is its own kind of torture, because the mind fills the void with every possible scenario, and some of those scenarios are unbearable. He's also spoken about his belief that Andrew is still alive, that somewhere, the quiet boy with the Slipknot t-shirt and the gift for mathematics grew into a man who, for reasons nobody yet understands, chose not to come home. Maybe that's true. Maybe Andrew Gosden is out there, living under a different name, and the one-way ticket was exactly what it looked like, a departure with no return. Or maybe something happened to him in the hours after he left King's Cross, something facilitated by a person who knew how to find a lonely, phoneless teenager in a crowd of millions. We don't know. And the cameras that should have told us threw the answer away before anyone thought to ask. Andrew Gosden stepped out of a train station on a Friday morning in September 2007 and walked into a void that has lasted nearly 20 years. 7 seconds of footage, a one-way ticket, and a silence that is never broken. Let me tell you about a place that shouldn't be able to swallow a person whole. Bury St Edmunds is a market town in Suffolk, England. It's been there since before the Norman conquest. It's the kind of town that has a ruined abbey at its center and a farmer's market on Saturdays. The high street has a Greggs, a Costa, a few independent shops, and the sort of quiet, well-maintained energy that says, nothing bad happens here. The crime rate is low, the streets are well lit, and in 2016, the town center was covered in high-definition CCTV, the kind of blanket surveillance that the UK does better than almost anywhere else on Earth. You can't walk 10 feet through the center of Bury St Edmunds at night without being recorded. Every pub doorway, every cash machine, every junction, it's all on camera. On September 24th, 2016, the 23-year-old man walked through this web of cameras wearing a bright pink Ralph Lauren polo shirt. He was 6 feet tall, fit, and impossible to miss. Every camera that caught him that night recorded him clearly. And then he turned a corner into a small service area behind some shops, and he vanished from the face of the earth. His name was Corey McKeague, and his case broke an entire police force. Corey McKeague was a gunner in the RAF regiment based at RAF Honington, about 9 miles outside Bury St Edmunds. He was also a trained medic, fit, charismatic, the kind of guy who made friends everywhere he went. His mates described him as the life of the party, funny, loud, always up for a laugh. He had a puppy named Luelle that he adored. He was 23 years old and loving life. He was also, it is by his own admission and everyone else's, an extremely heavy drinker. Not in a dark way, in a young soldier on a Friday night way. Corey was the guy who'd drink until the bouncers told him to leave, then cheerfully wander off to find a kebab. He'd done it dozens of times. It was routine. And it's that routine, that pattern of heavy drinking followed by wandering, that makes the night of September 24th feel like it should have ended the way every other Friday night ended, with Corey getting home, sleeping it off, and showing up for duty the next morning. But this Friday was different. The night starts normally. Corey goes out with friends in Bury St. Edmunds. They hit the bars, they drink, a lot. At some point during the night, Corey gets separated from the group and ends up at a nightclub called Flex. And he's so drunk that the door staff ask him to leave, not because he's aggressive, but because he can barely stand. He's cheerful about it. He wanders off into the town. CCTV picks him up on Brent Govel Street at about 1:20 a.m. He's eating a kebab, swaying slightly, chatting with a stranger on the pavement. He's wearing that unmistakable pink shirt. He looks like a guy having a good night. Sloppy, sure, but happy. Then he does something that his friends say was completely in character. He finds a shop doorway, Hughes Electrical on Short Brackland, and lies down for a nap. Right there on the street, the CCTV captures him sleeping in that doorway for nearly 2 hours. From about 1:30 a.m. to 3:20 a.m., Corey McKeague is passed out in a doorway in the middle of town. At 3:24 a.m., he wakes up. He stands, looks around for a moment, and starts walking. He heads down Brent Govel Street and turns into a small service area that locals call the Horseshoe. Now, visualize this with me. The Horseshoe is a narrow U-shaped loading area behind a row of shops, Greg's Bakery, a couple of other businesses. It's where deliveries happen and where the commercial bins are kept. Large industrial wheelie bins, the kind that get emptied by lorries with mechanical arms. The Horseshoe has brick walls on 3 sides and one way in and one way out for a person on foot. It's a dead end. The CCTV camera that covers the entrance to the Horseshoe records Corey walking in at 3:25 a.m. He doesn't come running out. He doesn't stumble back onto the street. The camera keeps rolling. Minutes pass, then hours. The sun comes up over Bury St. Edmunds. People begin walking past the entrance. Delivery drivers pull in and out. The police would later review every frame of footage from that camera between 3:25 a.m. and well into the morning, identifying every single person and vehicle that entered and exited the Horseshoe. Corey McKeague, the man in the pink shirt, 6 feet tall, impossible to miss, never walks back out. At 4:19 a.m., 54 minutes after Corey entered the Horseshoe, a Biffa waste collection lorry pulls in. It empties a large bin behind the Greg's Bakery using its mechanical lift. The whole process takes 51 seconds. The lorry drives away. When Corey doesn't show up for duty at RAF Huntington, the alarm is raised. His phone is traced. It last pinged in the Horseshoe area, and then its signal began moving, tracking in perfect sync with the route of the Biffa bin lorry. All right, let's stop and do the math. Because the math is where this case either makes perfect sense or falls completely apart, depending on which number you believe. When police first contacted Biffa, the waste collection company, they asked for the weight data from the bin that was emptied at 4:19 a.m. Biffa reported that the bin weighed 11 kilograms, that's about 24 pounds, a bag of dog food. Corey McKeague weighed roughly 90 kilograms. There is no version of physics where a 90-kilogram man fits inside an 11-kilogram reading. So for months, the police operated under the assumption that Corey was not in the bin. They searched elsewhere. They explored theories of abduction. They looked at the 23 unidentified people captured on nearby CCTV that night. They investigated the possibility that someone gave him a lift out of the Horseshoe in a vehicle. They spent months chasing leads that took them nowhere. And then, in February 2017, someone looked at the raw data from the bin lorry more carefully, and they found something that changed everything. The lorry's onboard weight recording device had been reset. The data that produced the 11-kilogram figure was not accurate. When investigators audited the raw, unprocessed data, the bin actually weighed 116 kilograms. That's Corey's body weight plus some refuse. The discrepancy, 105 kilograms had been sitting in the data the whole time, hidden behind a system reset that one detective later described as highly suspicious. This shouldn't be possible. A critical piece of evidence in a missing persons case was wrong by a factor of 10, and nobody caught it for 5 months. By the time the corrected weight was discovered, the contents of that bin lorry had been dumped at the Milton landfill in Cambridgeshire and buried under thousands of tons of subsequent waste. So the police did the only thing they could. They launched one of the largest landfill searches in British history. Over the course of 20 weeks, specialist teams sifted through over 10,000 tons of waste at the Milton landfill. They worked in grid patterns, they used cadaver dogs, they found items from the correct time period and the correct collection route, proof they were searching in the right area. They found receipts and packaging that matched businesses on Brentgovel Street, but they never found Corey. Not a bone, not a tooth, not a scrap of pink fabric, not his phone, nothing. And this is where the case splits into two equally impossible conclusions. If Corey was in the bin, if the corrected weight is accurate and his phone tracking matches the lorry's route, then his remains should be in that landfill. The search teams were in the right location, at the right depth, with the right equipment. How do you miss an entire human body? The official answer is that the landfill is vast, and the remains may have been compacted and buried too deep for the search to reach. Maybe. But 10,000 tons of waste were moved, and not a single trace of him was found. And if Corey was not in the bin, if he somehow left the horseshoe by another means, then how? The camera covers the only pedestrian exit. No person matching his description walks out. The only vehicles that entered the horseshoe between 3:25 a.m. and dawn are accounted for. He didn't walk out. He didn't drive out. He didn't climb out. The walls are high, topped with obstacles, and there are cameras on the surrounding streets that would have caught him. He went in. He didn't come out on foot. A bin lorry came and left, and the landfill has nothing to show for it. In March 2022, a coroner's inquest officially ruled that Corey McKeague died by compression asphyxia, that he climbed into the bin behind Greg's, likely to sleep, and was crushed when the lorry's mechanical arm lifted and compacted the contents. The coroner concluded that his body is somewhere in the Milton landfill, buried too deep to recover. And maybe that's what happened. It's the explanation that fits the most data points, the phone tracking, the corrected weight, the lack of any exit on foot. Corey was a heavy sleeper when drunk. He'd been known to nap in strange places, doorways, benches, even a bin on a previous occasion in Litchfield. The pattern was there. But here's the thing that sits with me. Corey McKeague was a trained RAF soldier. He was fit, he was young, and even drunk he was physically capable. The bin behind a Greg's Bakery is not a bed. It's a dark, foul-smelling metal container full of commercial food waste. Even blackout drunk climbing into one of those bins requires effort. You have to lift the lid, hoist yourself up and over the edge, and lower yourself inside. It's not something you stumble into, it's something you choose to do. And the landfill search, 20 weeks, on 10,000 tons, cadaver dogs, grid-by-grid excavation, found nothing, not a fragment. In a search that successfully identified rubbish from the correct street on the correct night, they couldn't find a single piece of a human being. The case is closed, the inquest has ruled. But the horseshoe still sits there behind the shops on Brentgovel Street, and the camera still watches its entrance, and the question still hangs in the air like the smell of old grease on a cold English morning. Corey McKeague walked into a dead end at 3:25 a.m. and became a ghost in the machine, seen by every camera on the way in and invisible to all of them on the way out. Watch this man. He's standing in the worst storm Dublin has seen in months. It's December. It's 3 a.m. The temperature is near freezing, the wind is tearing through the streets, and the rain is coming down sideways. Every sane person in the city is indoors. The pubs closed hours ago. The taxis aren't running. There's a citywide strike. The streets are empty. And this man is standing outside a locked office gate, partially hidden behind a pillar in the pouring rain. He's been there for over 30 minutes. He's not sheltering. He's not lost. He's not waiting for a cab that isn't coming. He's waiting for someone specific. And when that someone arrives, what happens next will haunt the city of Dublin for a quarter of a century. Dublin, Ireland, December 8th, 2000. The city is deep into the Christmas season. Lights strung across Grafton Street, office parties in every pub and hotel, the kind of collective holiday buzz that makes a city feel alive even in the dead of winter. But tonight, the weather has turned savage. Gale force winds are battering the East Coast, rain is flooding the gutters, and because of a taxi driver's strike, anyone who stayed out late is stranded, forced to walk home through the storm or find somewhere to wait it out. The streets around the Grand Canal in South Dublin are deserted. This area, Baggot Street, Haddington Road, the stretch between the city center and the residential neighborhoods of Ballsbridge, is normally a busy corridor of commuters and foot traffic. But at 4 a.m. during a storm, it's a tunnel of darkness. Streetlights reflect off flooded pavements. The canal water is black and choppy. The only sound is the wind. This is the world that Trevor Deely walked into. And it's the world that swallowed him. Trevor Deely was 22 years old. He worked in the IT department at Bank of Ireland's Asset Management Division on Wilton Terrace, a good job for a young man straight out of university. He was tall, 6'1", with a distinctive yellow and brown striped sweater and a quiet, dependable personality. His colleagues liked him. His family adored him. He was the kind of kid who called home regularly, showed up when he said he would, and never gave anyone a reason to worry. That night, Trevor had been at his office Christmas party. It started at Copperface Jack's, moved to the Hilton Hotel, and ended up at Buck Whaley's nightclub on Lower Leeson Street. It was a good night. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. At about 3:25 a.m., Trevor left the nightclub. Now, here's where his decision-making tells you everything about who he was. Most people in his situation, drunk, tired, no taxis, would have tried to walk straight home. Trevor didn't. He made a detour to his office on Wilton Terrace, about a 10-minute walk from the nightclub. Why? To pick up an umbrella and get set up for his shift the next morning. At 3:30 in the morning, in a storm, this kid is thinking about work tomorrow. That's Trevor Deely. Now pay close attention to the timeline, because the security cameras at Trevor's office tell a story that didn't fully make sense until 17 years later. Then at 2:59 a.m., more than half an hour before Trevor arrives, a man appears on the security camera at the rear gate of the Bank of Ireland building on Wilton Terrace. He's dressed entirely in black, dark jacket, dark trousers, hood or hat pulled up. He positions himself behind a stone pillar near the gate, partially sheltered from the rain but clearly visible on camera. And he waits. He stands there for 34 minutes in a freezing storm, in the dead of night. Outside, a locked office gate. Let that number settle. 34 minutes. That's not someone passing through. That's not someone ducking out of the rain. That's someone who has a reason to be at that gate and is willing to endure extreme discomfort to stay there. At 3:35 a.m., Trevor arrives at the gate. The man in black steps forward. There's a brief interaction. It looks like a short conversation, though we can't hear what's said. Then Trevor is buzzed into the building by a night shift colleague named Carl Pender. He goes upstairs, makes a cup of tea, checks his emails, and leaves a to-do list for the following day. Normal, responsible behavior. He also leaves a voicemail for a friend, talking about plans, the kind of casual message that suggests he fully intended to see tomorrow. While Trevor is inside, the man in black is joined at the gate by two other men. Investigators later identified these two as Trevor's co-workers, and they were fully cleared of any involvement. But the original man in black, the one who waited 34 minutes, was never identified. At 4:03 a.m., Trevor exits the building. He's now carrying a large Bank of Ireland branded golf umbrella. Bright, high visibility, the kind of thing you'd notice from 100 meters away. The man in black is no longer at the gate. Trevor turns right and begins walking toward his flat in Ballsbridge, about a 20-minute walk down Haddington Road. At 4:14 a.m., a security camera mounted on an AIB bank at the corner of Baggot Street Bridge and Haddington Road captures Trevor walking past. He's moving at a normal pace, umbrella up, heading home. 11 seconds of footage, the last 11 seconds of Trevor Deely's known life. And then, about 20 to 30 seconds after Trevor passes the camera, another figure appears in the frame. A man dressed in dark clothing, walking the same direction at a slightly faster pace, following the exact same route. Trevor Deely never arrives at his flat. He never calls anyone. He never shows up for work the next day. He is gone. For 17 years, this case sat in a kind of forensic limbo. The Gardaí, Ireland's national police, treated it as a missing persons case. The assumption was that Trevor, possibly disoriented from drinking, may have fallen into the Grand Canal on his walk home. It was dark. It was stormy. The canal was right there, tragic but simple. But in 2017, everything changed. Using new digital enhancement technology, investigators were able to sharpen the grainy Haddington Road footage, the clip of the man walking behind Trevor. For the first time, they could analyze the figure's build, gait, and clothing in detail, and what they concluded sent the case in an entirely new direction. The man following Trevor on Haddington Road matched the physical profile of the man who had been waiting at the office gate. Same build, same dark clothing, same movement patterns. For 17 years, investigators had treated the gate figure and the follower as two separate, unrelated people. Now, the working theory was that they were the same person, and that Trevor Deely had been stalked. This is where your skin starts to crawl. Because let's lay out what that means. The man in black arrived at the Bank of Ireland gate at 2:59 a.m. and waited 34 minutes in a violent storm for Trevor to show up. He spoke to Trevor briefly when he arrived. He stayed in the area while Trevor was inside. And when Trevor left the building at 4:03 and began walking home, the man in black followed him, maintaining a gap of about 20 to 30 seconds down a dark, empty, flooded street at 4 in the morning. That's not a coincidence. That's not a random encounter. That's a hunt. But here's the logic gap that makes this case so maddening. If the man in black attacked Trevor on Haddington Road, he did it in one of the most efficient disappearances in criminal history. Trevor was 6'1". He was carrying a massive, brightly colored umbrella. The route between the Haddington Road camera and his flat in Ballsbridge is a straight residential road, houses on both sides, a canal nearby, and in 2000, at least some additional CCTV coverage. And yet, no struggle was heard, no umbrella was found, and a golf umbrella doesn't just vanish. If it went into the canal, it would have floated. No blood, no clothing, no witnesses, even among the few people who might have been awake at that hour. A 6'1" man with a giant umbrella was erased from the physical world in the space of a few hundred meters. In 2017, acting on information from a criminal informant, the Gardaí excavated a 3-acre wooded site in Chapel Izod, west of the city center. The tip suggested that Trevor had been killed by a well-known Dublin gangster, a chance encounter gone wrong, possibly drug-related, and that his body had been buried in an underground pipe or tunnel on the property. The dig lasted a month. They found nothing. Then, in December 2023, another breakthrough and another dead end. Enhanced analysis of the Haddington Road footage allowed investigators to identify and interview the man seen walking behind Trevor. He was confirmed to be a different individual from the man at the office gate. He was cleared of all involvement, which means the original man in black, the one who waited 34 minutes in a storm to speak with Trevor, has never been identified. He remains the primary person of interest, and the gap between Trevor's last confirmed sighting and his total disappearance remains completely unexplained. There's a detail about this case that I can't stop thinking about. After Trevor disappeared, his family called his phone. It rang. Not voicemail, it rang. For days, his mother and father called that number, and it rang and rang in the darkness somewhere in Dublin until the battery finally died in the cold. Nobody ever answered, but the phone was on. It was out there, somewhere. A ringing in an empty room, or a wet ditch, or the pocket of a dead man, and nobody picked up. A reward of over 100,000 euros has been offered for information leading to Trevor's discovery. It remains unclaimed. The Dublin underworld, a network that usually leaks like a sieve when enough money or pressure is applied, has maintained what investigators describe as a wall of silence on this case. Someone knows what happened to Trevor Deely, probably several people, and in 25 years, not one of them has talked. Trevor's family has never stopped searching. His mother, Anne, has spoken publicly about the agony of not knowing, of marking birthdays and Christmases with an empty chair. The case remains officially open with Engarda Siochana. The man in black remains unidentified. Here's what the cameras show us. A young man leaves a Christmas party. He stops at his office because he's responsible and wants to be ready for work. He picks up an umbrella because it's raining. He starts walking home. And somewhere on that walk, on a road he'd taken dozens of times before, something was waiting for him in the dark. Trevor Deely didn't just disappear. He was followed into the storm. And the storm never gave him back. I want you to look at this man. Really look at him. Watch the way he moves. His stride is long and deliberate. His arms are swinging. He's carrying what looks like a folder or a portfolio under one arm. He's wearing a white dress shirt and slacks, the kind of outfit you'd wear to a job interview or a business meeting. He doesn't look lost. He doesn't look confused. He doesn't look like a man in crisis. He looks like a man who knows exactly where he's going. But here's the problem. He's walking through a retirement community in Henderson, Nevada, where he knows absolutely nobody. He drove 2.5 hours across the desert to get here. He parked his car on a street he'd never been to before. And after this 6-second clip, he is never seen again. Not on another camera. Not by a single witness. Not alive. Not dead. Just gone. His name is Stephen Kocher, and his case is one of the quietest, strangest disappearances in American history. Let me paint the picture of where this happens, because the location is half the mystery. Sun City Anthem is a master-planned retirement community in Henderson, Nevada, about 20 minutes southeast of the Las Vegas Strip, but a universe away from it. This is not Vegas. There are no neon lights, no casinos, no chaos. Sun City Anthem is the opposite of all that. It's gated. It's manicured. The lawns are trimmed to the millimeter. The streets are wide, clean, and almost always empty because most of the residents are retirees who are inside by noon when the desert sun gets serious. It's also one of the most surveilled residential neighborhoods in the state. Nearly every home has a security system. Doorbell cameras, garage cameras, driveway sensors, the whole suburban surveillance package. If you walk through Sun City Anthem, somebody's camera is going to see you. On December 13th, 2009, it's a Sunday. It's bright and cool, a crisp desert morning, maybe mid-50s. The streets are quiet. The energy is one of complete, almost eerie stillness. This is the kind of place where a 30-year-old man in business clothes walking down the sidewalk at noon sticks out like a glitch in the system. He doesn't belong here, and everyone's cameras know it. Now let me tell you about Stephen. Stephen Robert Kocher was 30 years old. He was a devout member of the LDS Church, a returned missionary who'd served in Brazil, an Eagle Scout, the kind of guy his family describes as polite, structured, and methodical. He'd studied communications and worked as a journalist. But by late 2009, the Great Recession had hit him hard. He'd moved to St. George, Utah, looking for a fresh start, but full-time work wasn't coming. He was falling behind on rent. He was picking up odd jobs where he could. But here's what matters. Stephen wasn't falling apart. He was struggling, sure, but he was still showing up to church, still calling his family, still buying Christmas presents for his siblings, presents that were later found in his car, wrapped and ready. He was a man under financial pressure, not a man in free fall. Does that sound like a man planning to vanish? In the days before December 13th, Stephen's behavior gets strange, but not in the way you'd expect. He starts making long, unexplained road trips. We're talking serious mileage. In the week before he disappears, his cell phone records show him driving through Utah and Nevada, covering over 1,000 miles in a single day on one occasion. He's not telling anyone where he's going or why. He's just driving. On the morning of the 13th, Stephen leaves St. George and heads southwest toward Las Vegas. His phone pings cell towers along the interstate as he crosses the desert. He stops at a Kmart. He stops at a gas station. Normal errands, normal behavior. And then, sometime before noon, he drives into Sun City Anthem and parks his white Chevy Cavalier on Savannah Springs Avenue, a quiet cul-de-sac deep inside the retirement community. He sits in the car for about 6 minutes, just sits there. Then he gets out. At 11:54 a.m., a neighbor's doorbell camera captures what happens next. Stephen walks away from the car, crosses the street, and heads north along the sidewalk. He's moving with purpose. Brisk steps, arms swinging, that folder or portfolio tucked under his arm. He doesn't pause. He doesn't look around. He walks like a man who has an appointment. A second camera, mounted inside a nearby home's garage, catches his reflection in a window as he passes. Same purposeful stride, same direction, same energy. And then he rounds a corner and walks out of the frame of the last camera that will ever see him. Stephen Cooker does not come back to his car. Not that afternoon. Not that evening. Not ever. The Cavalier sits on Savannah Springs for days before anyone thinks to call it in. When police finally process the vehicle, they find his wallet inside, his driver's license, his passport, a suit hanging in the back, and those Christmas presents, wrapped, labeled, ready to be delivered to his family. The only things missing are Stephen and his cell phone. All right, now look at the map with me, because this is where the story hits a brick wall. Stephen Coocher lived in St. George, Utah. Sun City Anthem is in Henderson, Nevada. That's about a 2.5-hour drive across open desert. He didn't have friends in Henderson. He didn't have family in Henderson. Police checked. He had no job interviews scheduled, no business contacts, no church connections, no dating prospects. Nothing that would explain why a man from southern Utah would drive 120 miles to park in a random cul-de-sac in a retirement community. So why was he there? What was in that folder? Who was he walking to meet? The police went door to door on Savannah Springs Avenue and the surrounding streets. Nobody recognized Stephen. Nobody was expecting a visitor. Nobody had scheduled a meeting or a delivery. He parked in front of a house whose residents had no idea who he was. He walked toward a block where no one had any connection to him. Let me put it this way. Imagine you drive 2.5 hours to a neighborhood you've never been to. Park your car, leave your wallet and your passport on the seat, and start walking with the confidence of someone who's done this route 100 times. That's what the footage shows. Stephen didn't hesitate. He didn't check his phone for directions. He didn't look at house numbers. He walked like he knew exactly where he was going. But nobody on that street knew him. So where was he going? Now let's talk about the phone, because this is where it gets genuinely strange. Stephen's cell phone didn't die when he disappeared from the camera at noon. It stayed active. At 5 p.m. that evening, 5 hours after the last sighting, his phone pinged a tower about 10 miles northeast of where he was last seen. Over the next 2 days, the phone kept moving. It drifted north toward Las Vegas. On the morning of December 14th, someone used the phone to check Stephen's voicemail near the intersection of US 95 and Russell Road. Think about that. Someone accessed his voicemail. That's not a passive ping. That's not a phone sitting in a bush. Someone picked up Stephen Coocher's phone, turned it on, and checked his messages. Was it Stephen? Was it someone who took the phone from him? If he was alive and checking his voicemail, why didn't he call anyone? Why didn't he go back for his car, his wallet, his Christmas presents? And if someone else had the phone, why check the voicemail of a man you just harmed? Why keep the phone active and moving for 2 days instead of destroying it or ditching it immediately? None of the options make clean sense. Every theory has a hole in it big enough to drive a Chevy Cavalier through. Some investigators have speculated that Stephen was running an errand for someone, delivering money or documents to pay off a debt or settle back rent. The folder, the business clothes, the purposeful walk, it all fits the profile of a man making a delivery. But if the delivery went wrong, if Stephen walked into a bad situation, then we're looking at foul play in one of the most camera-dense neighborhoods in Nevada. And nobody saw a thing. Others have suggested suicide. Stephen was under financial pressure. He was behind on rent. He was struggling in the recession, but the evidence doesn't support it. A man planning to end his life doesn't wrap Christmas presents. He doesn't drive 2.5 hours to a retirement community and walk briskly with a folder. And most importantly, there's no body. Henderson is surrounded by open desert, and Nevada search teams have covered that terrain extensively. Not a single bone, not a scrap of clothing, not a trace of Stephen Coker has ever been recovered. There's a strange footnote to this case that muddied the early investigation. Around the same time Stephen disappeared, another missing persons case was consuming the same region, the disappearance of Susan Powell, whose husband, Joshua Powell, lived not far from Stephen's route. For a time, investigators explored a possible connection between the two cases. They found none, but the media attention on the Powell case pulled resources and public focus away from Stephen's disappearance at the critical early stage when leads are freshest. Stephen's family has never stopped searching. His parents have maintained his case in the public eye, done interviews, pushed for new leads. They've said repeatedly that Stephen was not the kind of person who would vanish without a word. He was methodical. He was communicative. If he was in trouble, he would have called. But he didn't call. He walked around a corner on a quiet Sunday morning in a neighborhood where nobody knew his name, and the silence that followed has lasted 15 years. Here's what I keep coming back to. That footage. That 6-second clip of a man walking with purpose, carrying a folder, dressed for business, moving like he had somewhere to be. Everything about his body language says, I know where I'm going, but everything about the evidence says he walked into nothing. No destination, no meeting, no trace. Stephen Coker is the man who went for a walk and simply never stopped. This is a story about a woman who disappeared on the worst day in modern American history. And the question that has haunted her family, the courts and investigators for over 2 decades, isn't whether she's dead, it's when she died. And why? Because if she died before the planes hit, then her disappearance is a personal tragedy that happened to coincide with a national one. But if she died after, if she was one of the people who ran toward the towers that morning, then she's a hero whose name belongs on a memorial. And the difference between those two stories has been the subject of legal battles, private investigations, and a mystery that 9/11 both created and made impossible to solve. Battery Park City, Lower Manhattan, September 10th, 2001. It's a Monday evening, late summer in New York, warm, humid. The kind of evening where people walk slow and the restaurants put tables on the sidewalk. The neighborhood sits on the western edge of the financial district, directly across West Street from the World Trade Center. From the upper floors of the apartment buildings, you can see the Twin Towers so close they fill the window. They're not a landmark from here. They're a neighbor. The city is normal. Utterly, completely, mundanely normal. People are picking up dry cleaning. People are grocery shopping. People are arguing about what to have for dinner. Nobody knows that this is the last normal evening the city will have for a very long time. Dr. Sneha Ann Phillip lives in one of those Battery Park City apartments with her husband, Dr. Ron Lieberman. She's 31 years old. She's an internal medicine resident, smart, trained, capable. She grew up in a tight-knit Indian-American family and married Ron in a ceremony that blended both their cultures. On paper, she is the kind of life people aspire to: a medical career, a loving spouse, a home 2 blocks from the World Trade Center. But beneath the surface, things are complicated. Sneha had recently been suspended from her residency program over allegations related to a false complaint she'd filed. There were whispers of marital friction. Investigators would later suggest she had a pattern of staying out late with people her husband didn't know. None of this makes her a bad person. It makes her a real one, someone navigating professional pressure, personal struggles, and the kind of private complexity that most people keep hidden. On the afternoon of September 10th, Sneha is off work. She spends part of the day cleaning the apartment and chatting with her mother over instant messenger for about 2 hours. At around 5:15 p.m., she leaves the apartment to run errands, dropping off clothes at a dry cleaner. And then she goes shopping. At approximately 6 p.m., Sneha enters the Century 21 department store, a massive discount retailer located directly across the street from the World Trade Center. If you've been to New York, You know Century 21. Racks crammed together, crowds pushing through narrow aisles, the kind of place where you go in for one thing and come out 2 hours later with bags you didn't plan on carrying. The CCTV inside the store captures Sneha browsing and purchasing items over the course of about an hour and 20 minutes. She uses her husband's American Express card. The receipt shows roughly $550 worth of merchandise. Lingerie, 3 pairs of shoes, bed linens, and a dress. She appears calm, unhurried, doing the kind of shopping a person does when they're settling into domestic life, buying things for a home they plan to keep living in. A store clerk later reported seeing Sneha with another woman, possibly of Indian descent. But the store's surveillance footage is grainy, and this second woman has never been identified or come forward. She's a ghost in the background of a ghost's last confirmed hours. Sneha leaves Century 21 at approximately 7:18 p.m. on September 10, 2001. That is the last time she is confirmed on any camera anywhere. Now, this is where the timeline gets blurry. Because what happens between 7:18 p.m. on the 10th and 8:46 a.m. on the 11th, roughly 13 hours, is a complete blank. Her husband, Ron, was working a late shift at the hospital. He came home, assumed Sneha was out with a friend or had gone to bed at a relative's place and went to sleep. He didn't panic. There was no reason to. At 4 a.m. on September 11th, a phone call was placed from the couple's apartment to Ron's cell phone. He was asleep and didn't answer. He later said it might have been an accidental dial or an attempt to check voicemail, but someone was in that apartment at 4 in the morning. Was it Sneha? Was she home all along? Or had she come back during the night? And then, at 8:43 a.m., 3 minutes before American Airlines Flight 11 struck the North Tower, the lobby camera of their apartment building captures something. A woman enters the frame. She's silhouetted against the morning light, making identification difficult, but her height, hair, and build match Sneha's. She's wearing what appears to be a dress similar to the one purchased at Century 21. She approaches the elevator, waits a moment, then turns and walks back out of the building onto the street. She is not carrying any shopping bags. 3 minutes later, the first plane hits. The world changes. And Sneha and Philip is never seen again. Here's where this case splits into 2 completely different stories, and the one you believe depends on which facts you weight the heaviest. Story 1. The hero narrative. Sneha was in or near her apartment on the morning of September 11th. Though she saw or heard the first plane hit the North Tower, a building she could practically touch from her living room window. She was a doctor. Her training, her instincts, everything in her professional DNA would have told her to run toward the disaster, not away from it. She left the building, maybe that's her in the lobby footage, and headed for the towers to help. She entered the complex, and she was killed when the buildings collapsed. This is the version her family believes, and there's a cold mathematical logic that supports it. Out of the nearly 3,000 people killed that day, over 1,100 have never been identified through DNA. The destruction was so total, the heat so intense, that in many cases there was simply nothing left to recover. If Sneha was in the lobby or lower floors of the North Tower when it came down, there would be no remains, no DNA match, no trace. She would be, forensically, indistinguishable from the void. Story 2. The disappearance. Sneha's life was under pressure, professional trouble, personal secrets, a pattern, according to investigators, of late nights and unaccounted hours. In this version, Sneha didn't come home on the night of September 10th because she was with someone or because she was already gone. Something happened to her that night completely unrelated to the attacks. She was the victim of foul play, or she chose to leave, and 9/11 became the most devastating cover story in history. A catastrophe so vast that one missing woman could vanish inside it without anyone noticing for days. But there's a catch with both stories. If you believe she disappeared on the night of the 10th through foul play or by choice, then you have to explain the shopping. Put yourself in her shoes for a second. She spent $550 on bed linens, lingerie, shoes, and a dress. That's not how a person shops on the last night of a planned disappearance. You don't buy 3 pairs of shoes for a home you're about to walk away from. You don't invest in new bedding for a bed you'll never sleep in again. That shopping trip looks like a woman who expected to wake up tomorrow in her own apartment and go on living her life. And if you believe the hero narrative, that she ran to the towers on the morning of the 11th, then you have to explain the missing shopping bags. The lobby footage shows a woman matching her description leaving the building without bags. If she came home the night before, where are the Century 21 purchases? They weren't in the apartment, they weren't at the dry cleaner, they've never been found. If she came home, unpacked, slept, and then left in the morning, the bags should be there. They're not. Both theories have a hole in them, and 9/11 made it impossible to fill either one. The legal battle over Sneha's status tells its own painful story. Initially, she was listed as a victim of the September 11th attacks. But in 2004, a surrogate court judge removed her name, ruling there was no proof she was at the World Trade Center. The judge pointed to her personal troubles and suggested she might have used the attacks as cover to flee her life. Her family fought back. In 2008, an appeals court reversed the decision. The ruling concluded that Sneha Ann Phillip was most likely the 2,751st victim of the attacks, reasoning that as a physician living 2 blocks from the towers, her instinct upon witnessing the disaster would have been to help. Her name was restored. Her death was officially attributed to the collapse of the World Trade Center, but no physical remains of Sneha Ann Phillip have ever been identified at Ground Zero. Here's what stays with me about this case. Every other disappearance we've covered in this series has a clear frame, a last sighting, a camera angle, a moment where the person crosses from the known world into the unknown. With Sneha, the frame itself is broken. We don't know if her last moment was in a department store on a Monday evening or in the shadow of a collapsing skyscraper on a Tuesday morning. The mystery isn't just where she went, it's when she stopped being here. She exists in a space between 2 timelines, the personal and the historical. In one, she's a woman whose private struggles led to a private end on an ordinary September night. In the other, she's a doctor who heard the worst sound in American history and did what doctors do. She ran toward it. Her husband, Ron Lieberman, eventually had her declared dead. Her family has mourned her publicly and privately. Her name is etched into the 9/11 memorial at Ground Zero, panel S66, among the names of the other victims. If you go there, you can find it. You can run your fingers over the letters and know that somewhere beneath the reflecting pools in the bedrock of Lower Manhattan, the answer to what happened to Sneha Ann Phillip is buried with everything else that was lost that day. She is the only person officially listed as a victim of September 11th whose whereabouts on that morning remain a complete mystery. She was last seen buying bed linens and shoes on a warm Monday evening, planning for a tomorrow that either killed her or erased her. And the city that burned around her has never been able to tell us which. Keep your eye on the man in the alleyway. Watch the way he moves. He enters the frame slowly, not walking through, not cutting across. He stops. He stands still in the freezing dark for nearly 2 minutes. Then he turns and leaves, moving faster than he came in. He wasn't passing through. He was waiting. That alleyway runs directly behind the home of a woman named Claudia Lawrence. And in the hours after that footage was recorded, Claudia vanished from one of the safest neighborhoods in England without making a single sound. York is one of those English cities that feels like it was designed to make you feel safe. It's ancient, Roman walls, medieval streets, a Gothic cathedral that's been standing for 700 years. The neighborhoods around the city center are residential and quiet. They're the kind of places where people walk their dogs at the same time every morning and say hello to the postman by name. Heworth, where Claudia lived, is exactly that, a pleasant suburb about a mile northeast of the city walls. Terraced cottages, small gardens, narrow lanes, the sort of community where if someone screamed at 5 in the morning, half the street would hear it. In March 2009, the crime rate in York was unremarkable. Nothing about this city suggested that someone could disappear from a residential street during a routine morning commute and never be found. And yet that's exactly what happened. Claudia Elizabeth Lawrence was 35 years old. She worked as a chef at the University of York, a good, stable job she'd held for years. She lived alone in a small house on Heworth Road, a place she'd made her own. When she didn't drive, her car was in the shop at the time, though even normally she preferred to walk. Her commute to the university was about 3 miles each way, a route she walked so consistently that neighbors could set their clocks by her. She left at the same time. She took the same streets. She was, by every definition, a creature of habit. She was also deeply social. Claudia was a regular at the Nag's Head pub, where she had a close circle of friends. She spoke to her parents, Peter and Joan, almost every single day. Quick evening calls, checking in, talking about nothing in particular. She was planning to attend a family wedding. She was thinking about Mother's Day gifts. She was living the kind of ordinary, connected life that doesn't end in a disappearance. But it did. Wednesday, March 18th, 2009. I see Claudia works her shift at the University of York. CCTV at the campus captures her leaving at about 2 p.m. She walks home along her usual route, a path she's taken hundreds of times. She stops to post a letter. A neighbor spots her near her house at around 3 p.m. She's in good spirits, nothing unusual. That evening, she follows her routine to the letter. She calls her father, Peter, and they chat about a family wedding and some upcoming plans. Then, she speaks to her mother, Joan. Both later described the conversations as completely normal, warm, relaxed, the kind of calls you make when everything is fine. The last confirmed electronic activity from Claudia's phone is an outgoing text message at 8:23 p.m., followed by a final incoming text at 9:12 p.m. After that, the phone goes quiet. The next morning, Thursday, March 19th, Claudia is scheduled to start her shift at the university at 6 a.m. She doesn't show up. Her colleagues notice immediately. Claudia doesn't miss work. She doesn't call in late. She is pathologically punctual. When she still hasn't appeared or answered her phone by mid-morning, her friends and co-workers start calling around. Nobody has heard from her. Her father drives to her house. The front door is locked. He lets himself in with a spare key. The house is tidy. The bed is neatly made. There are unwashed dishes in the kitchen sink, a plate and a cup, suggesting she'd had breakfast or a late snack. Her passport is there. Her bank cards are there. Her jewelry is there. But several things are missing: her Samsung phone, her rucksack, her chef's whites, and her hair straighteners. Now, the missing items tell a story, but it's a strange one. The rucksack and chef's whites suggest she was preparing to leave for work. But the hair straighteners? You don't take hair straighteners to a kitchen shift. You take them if you're planning to look presentable for something else later in the day, or if someone is packing your things for you and doesn't know what matters. Claudia's phone stayed active in the Heworth area until 12:10 p.m. on the 19th. Then it was manually switched off. Not a dead battery. Not a signal loss. Someone pressed the power button 15 hours after her last text and 9 hours after she should have arrived at work. And then there's the footage from the alleyway. The CCTV camera positioned at the rear of Claudia's row of cottages captured something that has never been explained. At 5:05 a.m. on the morning of March 19th, about an hour before Claudia would normally leave for work, a man appears on camera walking down the alleyway behind her house. He's thin, wearing a dark hoodie, and he moves slowly, deliberately. At 5:07 he stops. He doesn't lean against a wall. He doesn't light a cigarette. He just stands there in the freezing pre-dawn darkness and appears to watch the rear of the properties. Then, at 5:08, he turns and walks back the way he came, noticeably faster than when he arrived. The whole sequence lasts about 3 minutes, but the way criminologists have described his behavior is telling. Very, very suspicious. This wasn't a man taking a shortcut. This was a man who came to that alleyway for a reason and then changed his mind, or finished what he came to do. There's a second sighting that morning. At 5:35 a.m., a witness reported seeing a thin man in a hoodie, approximately 5'6", smoking a cigarette with his left hand on the Melrose Gate Bridge, a footbridge on Claudia's walking route to work. He was standing with a woman who may have been Claudia. The witness couldn't be certain. The lighting was poor, but the timing aligns perfectly with when Claudia would have been passing that spot if she'd left home on schedule. And here's the detail that makes this case so maddening. Claudia's walk to work was 3 miles long. It passed through residential streets, across footbridges, past shops and homes, many of which had CCTV. Police checked every camera on her route. Not a single one captured her that morning. Not one. If Claudia left her house and started walking to work, she should have appeared on at least several cameras along the way. She didn't. Which means one of two things. Either she never left the house, or she was intercepted so early in her walk, within the first few hundred meters, that she never reached the first camera on the route. Now, this is where the neighbors started talking, because the investigation quickly uncovered that Claudia's private life was more complicated than her daily routine suggested. Police described a complex personal life. There were indications of relationships that her closest friends didn't know about. Investigators focused heavily on her circle at the Nag's Head pub, where they encountered what North Yorkshire police have publicly described as a circle of silence, people who they believe know more than they're saying, but who have refused to cooperate fully. Multiple arrests have been made over the years. At least 9 people have been questioned under caution. DNA from an unidentified male was found on a cigarette butt in her car. A silver Ford Focus with brake lights activating was captured on a nearby camera around the time she disappeared. None of it has led to a charge, not once. But here's what doesn't sit right about the complicated private life narrative. Let's follow the logic. Even if Claudia was involved with someone her friends didn't approve of, even if she had secrets, does a complicated dating life explain how a woman vanishes from a residential street at 5 in the morning without a single neighbor hearing a struggle? Does it explain why someone was standing in her alleyway in the dark, watching her house? Does it explain why her phone was deliberately switched off 9 hours later by someone who wasn't her? A messy personal life is not a motive, it's a distraction. And in Claudia's case, it may have been the distraction that cost her the investigation. Claudia Lawrence's case was formally classified as a suspected murder investigation in 2009. It has been reviewed, reopened, and re-examined multiple times since. Millions of pounds have been spent. Hundreds of people have been interviewed. The alleyway footage has been enhanced, analyzed, and shown on national television. And still, no charges, no body, no confession, no resolution. Her father, Peter Lawrence, spent the remaining years of his life campaigning for the rights of families of missing people. He lobbied Parliament, he gave interviews. He pushed for what became informally known as Claudia's Law, legislation that would give the families of long-term missing persons the legal authority to manage their loved ones' affairs without having to declare them dead. He did all of this while carrying the weight of not knowing what happened to his daughter. Peter Lawrence died in 2021. He never found out. The case remains open. North Yorkshire police say they believe they know who is responsible, but they lack the evidence to bring a prosecution. The circle of silence at the Nag's Head has never broken. The man in the alleyway has never been publicly identified. Here's what I keep coming back to. Claudia Lawrence walked the same route at the same time every single working day of her life. She was predictable, she was punctual, she was a pattern. And someone knew that pattern well enough to be standing in the shadows behind her house at 5 in the morning on the one day she would never reach the end of it. Somewhere in the grainy darkness of that 2009 footage is a face that knows exactly what happened, and in 16 years, that face has never spoken. Let me tell you about a man who found something in the desert that scared him so badly he ran away. And then the internet dared him to go back. The Sheep Mountains sit about 35 miles north of the Las Vegas Strip. From the casinos, you can see them on a clear day, a long, jagged ridgeline that looks close but isn't. In reality, the Sheep Range is one of the most remote and inhospitable stretches of terrain in southern Nevada. No cell service once you're in deep, no water sources, temperatures that swing from over 100 degrees in summer to below freezing at night. The ground is a mix of loose rock, ancient limestone, and vertical mine shafts left over from a century of prospecting. Shafts that drop straight down into darkness with no warning, no fencing, and no bottom you can see. This is also the backyard of Nellis Air Force Base and the Nevada Test and Training Range, the military complex that includes the area colloquially known as Area 51. The proximity matters, not because of aliens, but because it means large sections of the Sheep Range are restricted, unpatrolled, and unmapped by civilian agencies. If you get lost out here, you're not getting found quickly. In 2014, the YouTube wilderness community was booming. Guys with GoPros and hiking boots were uploading solo treks into the desert, exploring abandoned mines, documenting strange rock formations, and chasing the kind of low-budget mystery content that the internet devoured. Creepypasta was at its peak. Every abandoned building had a demon. Every cave had a secret. The line between genuine exploration and performance was getting thinner by the day. And right in the middle of all of it was a guy named Kenny Veach. Kenny Veach was 47 years old. He lived in the Las Vegas area and described himself as an experienced desert hiker. Serious mileage, serious endurance, the kind of guy who spent more time on ridgelines than in rooms. He was active on YouTube under the handle SnakeBitMG. Though he wasn't a big creator, he didn't have a following. He was more of a commenter, the guy in the replies section sharing his own stories beneath other people's videos. And one of those comments is where this whole thing started. Sometime in 2014, Kenny left a comment on a YouTube video called "Son of an Area 51 Technician." In it, he described something he'd found during a solo hike in the Sheep Mountains. And he said he'd come across a cave entrance that was shaped like a perfect letter M. Smooth, symmetrical, almost too precise to be natural. And he said that as he approached the entrance, his entire body began to vibrate. Not a metaphor, not a figure of speech. He described a physical sensation, a deep, resonant vibration that started in his chest and spread through his limbs. He said it intensified the closer he got to the opening. And he said it scared him so badly that he turned around and left without going inside. Now, check out the comment section beneath that. The internet did what the internet does. Some people were fascinated. Some people called him a liar. Some people dared him to go back and prove it. The skepticism was loud and direct. You're making it up, you're clout chasing, put up or shut up. So Kenny went back. He filmed a second hike, a video he uploaded titled M Cave Hike, where he retraced his steps through the sheep range looking for the cave. The footage is real. The terrain is brutal. You can hear him breathing, scrambling over rocks, scanning ridgelines, but he doesn't find the cave. He covers miles of ground and comes up empty. The video ends with him frustrated but determined. He's going to try again. That video got thousands of views. For the first time, Kenny had an audience, and that audience wanted one thing: the M Cave. On November 10th, 2014, Kenny told his girlfriend, Sherian Pilgrim, that he was heading out for a short overnight trip to find the cave. He packed light. He drove to a trailhead in the sheep range and started hiking. But here's the detail that changes everything about this story. Kenny left his video camera at home. The man who was going into the desert specifically to film a cave for his YouTube audience did not bring the tool he needed to film it. He took only his cell phone. He also left behind his gun, something his girlfriend later said he typically carried on desert hikes for protection against wildlife and the kind of unpredictable people you sometimes encounter in remote Nevada terrain. Kenny Veach never came home. When he didn't return, Sherian raised the alarm. A search was organized. A combination of official search and rescue teams and volunteers from the hiking community. They covered the area around his known trailhead. They checked mine shafts. They hiked the ridges he'd previously documented. On November 22nd, 12 days after he left, volunteers found his cell phone. Yet it was sitting on the ground near the opening of a vertical mine shaft, roughly 4 hours hike from where his car was parked at the trailhead. The phone was on the surface, near the edge of the shaft, not inside it, not at the bottom, on the ground, as if it had been placed there. The mine shaft was searched. It was empty. No body, no gear, no sign that anyone had fallen in. Kenny Veach was gone. All right, let's slow down and look at this the way an investigator would, because there are 3 competing theories about what happened to Kenny Veach, and each one has a problem. First theory is Kenny found something dangerous, and it killed him. The supernatural read. The M Cave was real, maybe a geological anomaly producing infrasound or toxic gases, maybe something connected to the nearby military installations, maybe something nobody has a name for. He went back, he found it, and whatever was inside didn't let him leave. The phone was left at the mine shaft as a final breadcrumb, his last attempt to mark a trail before something happened. It's a great campfire story. But the problem is obvious. No one has ever found the M cave. Not Kenny on his second attempt, not the search teams after he vanished, and not the dozens of amateur explorers who have scoured the sheep range in the years since. The cave has never been verified by a single independent source. Either it's in a location so remote that nobody has stumbled on it again, or it exists only in Kenny's account. There's a third possibility too, that the vibration he described was real but internal. Infrasound from wind channeling through a narrow opening can cause feelings of dread, a nausea and vibration. So can the early stages of hypoxia from bad air in a confined space. Both could turn an ordinary cave into something that felt otherworldly. Second theory is Kenny staged his disappearance and walked away from his life. He invented the M Cave story to build an audience, created a narrative arc, discovery, skepticism, quest, and then used the final hike as cover to vanish. His sister-in-law, Susan Veach, has publicly suggested this, calling him an attention seeker who may have faked the entire thing. But this theory has its own problems. Kenny was 47, unemployed, and by all accounts not living a life with the kind of resources you'd need to disappear permanently. He didn't have a stash of money, he didn't have a second identity. And the phone left at the mine shaft, that's not the move of a man trying to vanish cleanly. That's the move of a man leaving a marker. Which brings us to theory 3, the one his girlfriend believes. Sherian Pilgrim has spoken publicly about Kenny's mental health. She said he struggled with depression. He was unemployed and refused to seek medical help. She believes he went into the desert that day with no intention of coming back. The missing camera, the missing gun, the phone placed deliberately at the edge of a mine shaft. In her reading, these aren't the oversights of an excited explorer. They're the decisions of a man who didn't need documentation because he wasn't planning to show anyone. And there's a grim logic to it. If Kenny walked deep enough into the sheep range, past the mine shaft over the next ridge, on into one of the countless unmarked canyons and shafts that dot the landscape, his body might never be found. The desert is vast. The terrain is vertical. Animals, heat, and time would do the rest. He wouldn't be the first person to disappear permanently in the Nevada backcountry. But here's the thing that keeps this case from ever fully closing. If Kenny went out there to end his life, why the story? Why spend months building a narrative about a mysterious vibrating cave? Why film a second hike? Why tell his followers he was going over the next ridge to find it? Why create a quest that would send strangers into dangerous terrain looking for him and for something that may not exist? Was the M Cave story a cry for attention from a man who felt invisible? Was it a mythology he built around his own ending? A way to ensure that his disappearance would be remembered as something more than what it was? Or was the cave real, and everything that followed was just a man trying to prove it? To this day, people still go looking for the M Cave. Hikers with GPS units and drone cameras trek into the sheep range, filming their searches, uploading the footage, adding to a library of content that has turned Kenny Veach's disappearance into a permanent internet legend. Some claim to have found cave entrances that match his description. None have reported the vibration. None have produced definitive proof. The search and rescue teams have moved on. No official investigation is active. Kenny Veach is classified as a missing person. And the Sheep Mountains keep their secrets the way they always have, behind heat shimmer and loose rock and silence. This is where the internet gets dangerous, not because of creepypasta or conspiracy theories, but because of what happens when a real person's pain gets turned into content. Kenny Veach was a man. He had a girlfriend who loved him. He had a life that was, by most accounts, quietly difficult. And somewhere between the YouTube comments and the dare to go back, the line between the person and the story dissolved. The M Cave became bigger than Kenny. The legend outgrew the man. His phone sat in the dirt next to a mine shaft in the Nevada desert, waiting to be found, like a note left on a table in an empty house. It's the last thing he touched, the last deliberate act in a story that he started and the desert finished. Kenny Veach went looking for a mystery in the mountains, and in the end, he became the biggest mystery of all.